Okay, let's now have a look at the Scrum events. So Scrum events, there are 5 of them. All of those events are time box. This is one of the Scrum concepts where we say, well, every event at a maximum amount of time allocated, and we should not go above it. If we go above it, we should actually instead cancel the event and review, what went wrong. Okay, it's a possibility to review. What why are we so inefficient during our event? Okay, all of those events provide a formal opportunity to inspect and adapt. Again, remember the pillar of inspection and adaptation. So we should be able to see the work which has been done and also decide on if we adapt or not our course of action. 5 events again in Scrum. You have the sprint, which is a container event. We'll see this later. The sprint is running for a maximum length of a month. And inside the sprint, you have those 4 events called sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. Okay, now for the sprint. Again, this is a heartbeat of Scrum, and it contains all the work necessary to achieve the product goal. So everything will be done through sprint. So once one sprint finish, we start another one. So there is nothing between sprint. It's always a continuous cycle. A sprint has a length of 1 month maximum. It could be less. In general, you will see most of the Scrum team operate, with a 2-week sprint. Minimum generally accepted is 1 week, but nothing in the Scrum guide says that it cannot be less than a week. So you could even have sprint of 1 day. Okay, during the sprint, you do not make any changes which will endanger the sprint goal. So the sprint goal is basically a 1 or 2 sentence explaining what the Scrum team is trying to achieve for this sprint. The quality of the items produced should not decrease. So we do not make compromise on quality. Product backlog is refined as needed, meaning new items can come to the product backlog at any point of time. And the scope of the sprint can be clarified or maybe clarified and renegotiated with the product owner. Important to note that there is only one person who can cancel a sprint, or only one accountability who can decide to cancel a sprint if the sprint is not valid anymore, and this is the product owner. Okay, now sprint planning. This is the first event which is contained in a sprint, and it's time boxed to 8 hours maximum. The sprint planning will answer why do we want to do this sprint? Why is this sprint valuable? What can be done or what will be done during this sprint? And how are we going to get the work done? So how are we going to turn the selected product backlog item into a working increment? So something of value, something that the customer can inspect, something that the customer can use. The sprint goal, the product backlog item selected for the sprint, and the plan for delivering them is called the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog actually consists of 3 elements: sprint goal, sprint backlog items, and the plan to deliver them. And all of this is done during the sprint planning. So an unusual way of running the sprint planning would be the Scrum team meet together. The product owner will present a list of the product backlog item that he or she would like the team to take during the sprint planning. The developers have the possibilities to ask questions and negotiate the scope, because there could be maybe some items which they think are not feasible for this sprint, or maybe they believe that other items are maybe more important and will need to be inserted inside the sprint planning. So there is this, again, element of negotiation and discussion between the developers and the product owner. The Scrum Master helps to facilitate this event in case there are any issues or inefficiencies. Once the items are actually selected, the team will devise a sprint goal. And later on, the developers decide on how do they want to organize themselves to complete those sprint backlog items. So they make, a working plan for that. In general, this is by taking the items for the sprint from the sprint backlog and breaking them down into manageable pieces, into tasks, as an example. Okay, let's now move on to the daily Scrum. Daily Scrum will be a 15 minutes maximum time box event. And the goal of the daily Scrum, which is run daily, as its name indicates, is to inspect the progress towards the sprint goal and adapting the sprint backlog are necessary. This event is for the developers of the Scrum team, so the presence of the Scrum Master and the Product Owner is not necessary. It is run at the same time and same place again each day. And it's all about improving communication, identify impediments, and promote quick decision making. So this is really not a status report for a developer to other or for a developer to tell to the product owner and Scrum Master what he or she has done, but this is really an opportunity for the team to check their progress toward the sprint goal and how can they turn those sprint backlog items into a working increment. So they can adapt their course of action when there are new information which come into life. Of course, this is not the only event where the team can inspect and adapt, but because it's a regular event on a daily basis, it's a good opportunity for the team to check, where they are and how are they going to get the work done. Okay, now at the end of the sprint or towards the end of it, you have an event which I love to call the show and tell, and show, tell, and listen, actually, it should be, where the developers and the product owner will present the result of their work to their stakeholders, receive feedback on it. So you are actively looking for feedback during the sprint review, and based on the feedback received from the stakeholders, determine future adaptation. So decide the next course of action. A sprint review is time box for 4 hours maximum for a 1 month sprint. So this means that in case your sprint is only 2 weeks, you use a pro rata temporis, and you will say that, well, 4 hours for sprint review for a month of sprint. Then if we have a 2-week sprint, it's just 2 hours maximum. So again, the Scrum team there will present the results of their work and progress towards the product goal. They decide also on what to do next. So this is not only the Scrum team who decide what to do next, it's really the attendees. So everyone will discuss about potentially what can be done next. Product backlog may need to be adjusted based on this feedback. And at the end, the product owner for the next sprint, at the sprint planning, will decide finally what to do. He or she, of course, may decide it, before the sprint planning. But the idea is kind of you receive feedback from your stakeholder and you consider really based on their feedback what to do next. At the end, the product owner is still sovereign and decide, at the end what will go into the next sprint. But it's very important to listen actively to your stakeholder and proactively look for their feedback. Now here is the last event of a sprint in Scrum, and that's called the retrospective, and it's all about planning ways to increase quality and effectiveness. So it's time for the team to pause and think about what they have been doing great and need to keep, what was not or what is not going well, and what they need to improve. So that's where here the Scrum team will look at individuals, interaction, processes, tools, and so on, and check, what can be improved from there. Any impactful event should be, of course, addressed as soon as possible. Ideally, you will want to have at least one potential improvement which is bring into the next sprint. So at every sprint that you have an action improvement item. So this is the ideal state. Practically, it may not be the team may not be able to do that every time, but that's considered a good practice. So the more you scrum the scrum, as it is called, the better your team will be. So this is an event which, this is one of the most impactful event actually in Scrum, the sprint retrospective.